Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Managing Country Together webinar. Thank you for attending this morning. My name is Kim Wilson and I'm the Historic Heritage Coordinator at Parks Victoria, and I'll be facilitating this session. Before we begin, I'd first like to acknowledge all the traditional owners across Victoria as we come together virtually from far and wide this morning. I'm presenting from the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the land on which I meet with you today. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and those that may be here with us today. This is our 6th webinar in this Insights into Nature series, and we're excited this morning to have a few staff members from Parks Victoria's Managing Country Together team presenting for us. Managing Country Together is a directorate within Parks Victoria that supports teams across the organisation to work effectively with traditional owners. Our speakers are here today to talk about some of the exciting projects and partnerships that Parks Victoria and traditional owners work on together across Victoria to protect some of the natural and cultural values that exist across our parks estate. For today's session, we're very fortunate to have 3 presenters from this team. As I introduce them, we'll cross over and say a quick hello to each of them. First speaker, Maria Pizzi, joined Parks Victoria in 2018 as the Director of the Managing Country Together team. She previously worked with the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council to implement the Aboriginal Heritage Act. Maria has a background in law and social work and is enjoying the opportunities to build strong partnerships with traditional owners in looking after country across Victoria. Hi, Maria.
Hi, everyone.
Our second speaker, Katherine Mullet, is a Gunai-Kurnai and Monero woman and member of the Gunai-Kurnai Traditional Owner Land Management Board. At Parks Victoria, she works as the Aboriginal Heritage Coordinator for the Eastern region, supporting staff in working with traditional owners to protect Aboriginal cultural heritage on the parks estate. Good morning, Katherine.
G'day, everyone.
And our third speaker, Chrystle Carr, started at Parks Victoria in 2016 as an archaeologist in the Managing Country Together team. Her work has focused on the management and protection of Aboriginal ancestral remains and other cultural heritage on country in partnership with traditional owners. Hello, Chrystle.
Hello, how's everyone?
Thank you, Maria, Katherine and Chrystle, for being with us here today. We're very much looking forward to your presentation. Before we begin, just to quickly go over how the webinar will work. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, you can type them into the Q&A section on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll collate those questions and there'll be time at the end of the presentation for Maria, Katherine and Chrystle to answer some of those. In the meantime, though, if you have any IT issues, you can call or text our IT support person, Nicola. She's on standby, ready to help, and her phone number is 0475 999 159. And this number has also been posted into the Q&A section for you to see as well. We are recording this webinar and it will be uploaded afterwards online with all of our previous webinars, which have already been uploaded and are available on our Parks Vic website. So thank you everyone again for joining us this morning, and I'll now hand over to you, Maria.
Okay, thanks everyone for joining us. We're looking forward to having this conversation with you. I have to admit that I'm a little bit nervous starting because I've never done anything like this. I've never presented when one of my presenters is in Bairnsdale and the other presenter is in Eltham and I'm sitting in Thornbury. So I'm looking forward to you learning alongside us, and I'm going to be as brave as I can, and I hope that I can rely on a little bit of kindness from all of you, because it's the first time for all of us. I thought I'd start with a little bit of history about me, just to situate myself in all of this work that we do. I was born and raised on Gunai country in the Latrobe Valley, not too far away from where Katherine is now in Bairnsdale. But I didn't know that I was born and raised on Gunai country until I was an adult and until I'd actually left that country. Probably I had a much better understanding of traditional ownership as a result of joining the Aboriginal Heritage Council. That was really when I started to understand a different history of Victoria, because I'm of that age where we weren't really taught about the place where we live and what this place that we now call Victoria. I feel like I have a much richer appreciation of this land and of these peoples and of my history and of our shared history now, and I'm incredibly grateful for it, and I was very excited to join Parks Victoria because it gave me an opportunity to work alongside traditional owners in this extraordinary way. We started today with Kim giving us an acknowledgement of country, and a lot of us are used to that happening. Some of us find that it will happen pretty quickly, or we don't really understand why it matters, or it can sometimes feel a bit routine. So I thought I would start with bringing to mind why we do the acknowledgement of country. For me, it's an important moment to remember the deep history of this place that goes back countless generations. The nearest guess we have at the moment in Victoria is around about 60,000 years. There's a place called Moyjul in Warrnambool that people are still working on, but the indications are that settlement there started sometime perhaps about 60,000 years ago. And all those traditional owners have cared for country, have observed country, have watched country, have listened to country, have loved country. And we are the beneficiaries of that work. The acknowledgement of country gives us a chance to remember and to respect traditional owners, to respect their ancestors, to respect elders past and present, elders right now in Wurundjeri country where I am, who are looking after country right this minute, right now. The other thing it does is it allows me an opportunity to think about my contribution to that work and to put it alongside traditional owners' contributions, to think about how I can care for country, to think about how I can look after these beautiful places that have been cared for from time immemorial and are still being cared for now. And that's why we do an acknowledgement of country, and that's why the Parks Victoria board does one, and the presentation indicates to you some of the reflections that we build into those acknowledgements of country when we do them here at Parks Victoria. So the way we're going to do our presentation today is I'm going to start off with an overview of managing country together. We'll be using references here and there in our presentations, and they'll all be made available to you. So please be assured that you will have access to the information after the presentation if you're interested to learn a little more and look a little further. I'll hand over to Katherine and Chrystle, who will give you more information about the traditional owner partnerships and Aboriginal cultural heritage protection. I'll come back to talk about Aboriginal employment and wellbeing, and then we'll have time for questions. So at its broadest, what managing country together is about is a framework for the future of what Parks Victoria wants to be. We are committed to a vision of healthy cultural landscapes managed in partnership with traditional owners. We are increasingly doing our work in that frame. The Parks Victoria board has adopted a Managing Country Together framework document, and that's available on our website. It is aligned with international best practice. It aligns with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Persons. It also aligns with the Victorian Government's agenda, with the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities, and with the self-determination reform agenda, which the Victorian government has put in place to guide all work done by Victorian agencies in regards to Aboriginal communities and traditional owners. We have adopted a range of principles, 10 principles that guide our work with traditional owners. We have founded the Managing Country Together on a recognition of traditional owner rights, and you'll see when you have an opportunity to look at those principles in details that many of those principles pick up aspects of traditional owner rights in terms of protection of cultural heritage, in terms of recognition of traditional owner priorities and aspirations in the way in which we manage the Parks estate, in terms of the employment, in terms of acknowledgement of traditional knowledge, traditional language, traditional history. All of that is part of how we will build towards that vision of healthy cultural landscapes managed in partnership. And the framework adopts 3 key areas of action, which we're going to talk you through today, around cultural heritage protection, around traditional owner partnerships, and around Aboriginal employment and wellbeing. Because it's all founded around a rights-based approach and it's about traditional owners and working in partnership with them, I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview about in regards to how traditional owner recognition works in Victoria. So you're about to see a map which sets out traditional owner recognition. You'll see in the legend there that there's a reference to the recognition and settlement agreements, to native title consent determinations, and to registered Aboriginal parties. That is a signal of the 3 pathways that traditional owners can use to pursue formal recognition from the state of Victoria. Parks Victoria is clear that we are not in a position to offer formal recognition. That's not the work we do on behalf of the Victorian government. So what we do is we work with traditional owners in partnership across the landscape, whether they have formal recognition or not. Where there is no formal recognition in place, we work inclusively with all traditional owner groups who are asserting rights, because we know that there are traditional owners across Victoria, whether they've been formally recognised or not. Where formal recognition is in place, we will build our partnerships specifically with the traditional owner group that has been formally recognised. It's a complex environment, formal recognition. It's dynamic and changing, and we need to be flexible to change with it. We need to keep informed. Many of you may know that the Victorian government has committed itself to pursuing treaty, for example. I don't think any of us really know where the road to treaty will take us yet, but we need to be open to what might come from that. For now, we have 11 formally recognised traditional owner groups, and in the country that's recognised for those groups, we work exclusively with them when we build our partnerships. The 3 pathways, just to say a little bit more about that, are a little bit mixed. There's a pathway through the Native Title Act, which is through consent determinations through a federal court process, and that is based in Commonwealth law. Then there are 2 Victorian approaches that have been tailored to the Victorian context. One is the Recognition and Settlement Agreement that is adopted through the Traditional Owner Settlement Act, and the other is the appointment as a registered Aboriginal party by the Victorian Aboriginal Heritage Council, and that's all put in place under the Aboriginal Heritage Act. So they're 2 Victorian solutions or approaches in regards to traditional owner recognition in this place. This map is available publicly, and we'll provide you with a link to the place, to the Aboriginal Victoria, to a website that is managed by Aboriginal Victoria that gives you some more information about each of the formally recognised traditional owner groups, about the people who are represented by those groups. Sometimes it's clear. So in Gunno-Kurnai country, the Gunno-Kurnai people are represented by the Gunno-Kurnai Land and Waters Aboriginal Corporation. But in the West, Berengigagin Land Council represents the Watchabolik people. So sometimes the name of the corporation reflects the people who are represented by that corporation. Sometimes you need to dig a little deeper to understand a little more. But that information is available publicly, and we'll let you know where you can find it. I get a lot of hope out of this map because I know that in 1990, the Victorian government had not recognised any of these groups, and now less than 20 years really, because the work didn't start till well past 1990, but in a couple of decades, formal recognition has been put in place for about 70% of Victoria's land and waters. And I think that's a mighty achievement in the context of everything that's come before us. I think I will now move to telling you a little bit more about Managing Country Together. You might remember I said that the framework itself is built on 3 key areas of action. And I really love this diagram because I think it's a great way of letting you know that even though these are 3 distinct areas of action, we understand that they are integrated. We understand that country and people and culture are connected, and that you can't break the connections between these three areas of work. One of the great things about that is that we know that if we look after cultural heritage and protect cultural heritage on our estate, we will have a better chance of building effective partnerships with traditional owners, and we will make sure we have an organisation that is moving in a direction of cultural competence. So the plus is that benefits in one area of action have knock-on benefits in other areas of action. And the challenge is to hold all those areas of importance in all the work we do, and to apply ourselves in a holistic way. So bearing that in mind, I'm now going to hand over to Katherine, who's going to talk to you a bit more about traditional owner partnerships.
Thanks for that, Maria. As Maria said, my name is Katherine Mullet, and I'm a Gunno-Kurnai Monero woman, and I'm based out of Bairnsdale, and I work for Parks Victoria as the Aboriginal Heritage Coordinator. And a bit like Maria, I'm a little bit nervous as I'm not the greatest public speaker, but hopefully we'll bring you along with this journey and we'll all grow together. I'm following up from Maria talking about traditional owner partnerships. So there are 3 ways that Parks Victoria engages with traditional owners and brings them along with land management. And the first one is through formal recognition through joint management. So joint management comes out of a native title determination, where the state government recognises the traditional owners, the people of that country, were there prior to settlement. So that was their landscape and their country that they managed prior to Europeans coming along. Joint management really is about empowering and respecting the traditional owners to actively manage and care for their traditional lands and waters for all people. So joint management brings together a traditional owner land management board that sets the strategic direction around cultural heritage management, land management practices, and sort of tries to marry all those together so for the better for the park management and the park landscape. Parks Victoria currently works with 4 groups who have recognised settlement agreements. Those 4 groups are the Gunno-Kurnai people. They received their native title determination in 2010. The Yorta Yorta Traditional Owner Land Management Agreement in 2010 as well. The Dja Dja Wurrung Recognition and Settlement Agreement in 2013. And the Tanarong Recognition, which will be settled soon. We have another practice or another way that we engage through traditional owner partnerships, which is through cooperative management. Cooperative management agreements are different to traditional owner settlements. They are through an agreement that are formed between the state and the traditional owners. They aim to facilitate cooperation between traditional owners and state government on Crown management or land management practices. We engage with 3 cooperative agreements within Parks Victoria. First one is also with the Yorta Yorta Nation people, the Badjagadjan Land Council Aboriginal Corporation, and the Gunjmara people for Budjabin National Park, which is also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The third practice or traditional owner partnerships that we engage with traditional owners on country is through cultural burning. So with cultural burning, Victoria released a Victorian traditional owner cultural fire strategy. And you can also get that material, or that'll be made aware, the link will be made public. The purpose around the cultural burning traditional fire strategy is to have traditional owners really lead cultural practice of burning within their landscape. So to really set the strategic about right country, right fire for right country, supporting traditional owners and for the burning to think more outside of just asset protection of burning, but looking at the landscape, understanding that landscape, and putting the right fire in that landscape to manage the landscape for what it needs. So for the purpose of supporting hunting practices or to bring back bush foods in the right way. Cultural burning practices are, well, they're really important. The right fire and the right burning helps to support recognition back to country. It helps the country to heal, and it would help long-term the more strategic protection of our landscape. Next, Alana.
So that goes over to me. I'm Chrystle, and I'll be talking to you about the protection of Aboriginal cultural heritage on the Parks Victoria estate. As Maria mentioned before, the dates around Aboriginal people living in Victoria at least 60,000 years, and possibly, I believe, Moyle that you mentioned before, Maria, could be up to 120,000 years old. So Aboriginal people have lived in Victoria for countless generations, and the reminders of the ancestors are everywhere in the form of all kinds of Aboriginal cultural heritage that is both tangible in terms of artefacts and archaeological material that has been left behind, and also intangible with stories and songlines and cultural burning practices like Katherine mentioned before, and all of those kinds of things. So across Victoria, I guess there's many spectacular landscapes that people would recognise as Aboriginal cultural landscapes, such as Garryword, Grampians, and along all of the coastlines of Victoria, there's some amazing places that you would go to in your general parks visitation and working in parks that are all cultural landscapes along coastlines and rivers, common cultural heritage that you would find that is tangible, that would include middens and oven sites, stone tools everywhere. The stone tools are found everywhere. In Garryword, you would most likely find things like quarries and rock art sites. But apart from the really spectacular places where it's really obvious that there's amazing Aboriginal cultural heritage everywhere, you know, because Aboriginal people have lived here for so long, the remnants are everywhere. So we've got this little, if it works, a little clip here. This is in a metropolitan park in Plenty Gorge. As you can see, it's, you know, it's just a regular piece of bushland, a regular kind of clearing, the kind of place that you would think maybe didn't have that much Aboriginal cultural heritage there. When we started looking in this clearing, this is a little time lapse from our GoPro, we actually found hundreds of artefacts everywhere. So it is clearly a really significant site, and the stone artefacts that we found there were worked by master craftsmen. They were amazing, beautiful stone artefacts. One of the reasons why we were there is because the Managing Country Together team does cultural heritage assessments of all the projects that Parks Victoria completes. So if it's friends groups, or if it's Telstra putting in cables, or anything that happens on the Parks estate, an assessment comes through the Managing Country Together Directorate, and it is looked at by the Aboriginal cultural heritage officers, project officers and coordinators, which are a team of traditional owners that work within the Directorate, and they assess the likelihood of the project impacting adversely on Aboriginal cultural heritage places, and provide recommendations around how impacts can be minimised, because our primary focus is to conserve and protect Aboriginal cultural heritage on the Parks estate. And we work with traditional owners in the context of those assessments as well, particularly where there's really complicated projects that are going ahead. That's where a lot of the joint management agreements tie in with the cultural heritage assessments that we do. And a result of the assessments can often be that projects are moved, or there may be a recommendation to have an archaeologist prepare a cultural heritage management plan under the Aboriginal Heritage Act, or there may be a recommendation that the project can proceed with a permit. And in that context, heritage advisors are engaged and projects go ahead, usually with minimal impact on Aboriginal cultural heritage, because, as I said, our primary focus is protection and conservation. The types of cultural heritage that are found on the Parks estate, as I mentioned before, middens, artefact scatters, hearths, ancestral remains, ancient burial places, all detailed in a little user-friendly Aboriginal cultural heritage identification guide that the Managing Country Together team has put together. We have distributed hard copies to many friends groups and Parks employees and volunteers. I'm not sure how readily available the hard copies are in COVID times, because I believe that they're all locked up in our office, but it is downloadable from the website. So you can download a PDF version of that, and it gives you a little bit of detail with good visual prompts around the kinds of things that you'll find on the Parks estate. So, and like I said, flakestone tools, grinding stones, culturally modified trees, which Katherine will talk about in a minute, rock arts, quarries, all of those kinds of things. It's a very user-friendly sort of introduction into the kind of heritage that you'll find on the Parks estate. And maybe we'll go back to Katherine to talk about Blores Hill.
Thanks, Chrystle. Blores Hill is a project that we worked in conjunction with Gunai Land and Water Corporation. Blores Hill is a small 40-hectare park that is found just out of Hayfield. It has a network of legalised mountain bike trails through the park. Through the cultural heritage assessments that Chrystle was referring to before internally in Parks Victoria, we identified that there were some illegal tracks that were in the park, and we identified that they may be impacting on cultural heritage. So in a discussion with Gunai to work through the most appropriate way and to manage the park landscape and truly identify the nature and the extent of the cultural heritage within the park, we organised a joint agency and GLAWAC sort of survey of the park. We walked over the park over 2 days. We had Gunai staff, we had our own Managing Country Together staff, we had our local district staff. We also invited along the Mountain Bike Club's president and other members of the group to learn and understand about cultural heritage and to get a greater understanding of the park that they love to ride in, but also to understand the cultural heritage within that landscape. In the survey, we discovered several new sites that were not previously known, and one site which was rather significant and quite large in one part of the park. It was a great learning exercise, and it was a really great experience to get out there, especially with some volunteers, for them to understand the cultural heritage and the significance of such a small park, but actually how much cultural heritage was in that park landscape. The next sort of project that I want to talk to you about, which Chrystle mentioned before, was also a survey of another 2 different parks, both for the same reason. They were areas that was set aside for bushfire, for firewood collection areas. But through our assessment process again, we identified that there were several known cultural modified trees within the park landscape in the wood fire collection area. And you can see 2 of these images here on your screen. So the first one on the right hand side is that of a canoe, and the left hand side, which you can see, is on the ground, that tree, and it has 4 scars visible, and those scars were made for Coolman reasons. These trees could quite likely have been impacted by visitors going in to collect firewood if people were unaware that these were culturally modified trees. So part of the process of our assessment is to ensure that the protection of these cultural trees are kept, because they're our last living memory and last living part in that landscape that shows that connection to that country. In front of us here, we can also see is a recent project and a really great example of how we worked in partnership with traditional owners within the park landscape. This was the Chrystle canoe project, which was worked on with the Wurundjeri people. This modified tree was made at Plenty Gorge Park in 2012, and then there was a second project that we did with the Wurundjeri people post this canoe project in 2017 as well. These projects are really important both to the Wurundjeri people but also to Parks Victoria, because it supports a continuation of cultural practices within the park landscape. The canoe projects, particularly this project, prior to them actually committing and taking the bark off the tree, they actually went up to Mount Williams, which is a greenstone quarry place, which was a traditional route for the Wurundjeri people to travel up there for trade and ceremonial purposes. These men went up there in 2012. They actually collected greenstone, created their own stone axes, and brought them back down to this site, where they used those axes as well as steel axes to support the removal of the bark in a traditional way. The second project, as part of the Coorong canoe project, took place at the Boland Billabong near Bullen. The reason they chose that location, the Wurundjeri, was because traditionally the Wurundjeri people would gather there in large numbers to collect the eels for an eel fest, where the eels would actually sit in the billabong to fatten up. So the continuation of that culture, going to that place, that same location that their ancestors was extremely important to them and extremely important to Parks Victoria to support that continuation. And I'll pass on to Chrystle. Yes, sorry.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the rock art conservation work that Parks Victoria does. We actually have a role within our team that is a cultural heritage protection specialist, and his primary role is to protect rock art across the state, but most of the rock art in the state of Victoria is within the Garryword landscape. We're rediscovering rock art places across that landscape all of the time. It's a really rich, beautiful, amazing landscape, as I'm sure you all know. This particular slide depicts a conservation project that we did with Berengagin Land Council Aboriginal Corporation and a well-known rock art conservator called Andrew Thorne, or an art conservator. This was in the Black Range in Lil within Barenji Gadjan's registered Aboriginal Party area. The site is managed by Parks Victoria, but is accessed through private land. And the visitor impacts on the site, as you can see, are actually quite huge. People camp there, light fires within the rock shelter. The rock shelter is covered in extremely ancient rock art. It's so old that it's, baked onto the surface and quite faded in many places, but we use special technology called de-stretch to bring out the rock art. But because people have lit fires in this particular area, they use the charcoal to write their names and draw pictures over the existing rock art. We worked with Andrew Thorne in this particular instance to just sort of give traditional owners and Parks Victoria staff really simple techniques for the removal of charcoal from the rock art surface in a way that doesn't actually damage the art underneath. And you can see up the top left-hand corner of this slide, Darren Griffin, using what I said to Katherine before, looks like a big COVID swab. And that's kind of what it is. It's just a dowel with some cotton wool wrapped around the end, dipped in water. And when gently rubbed over, sort of twisted over the surface without applying too much pressure, it actually picks up the charcoal from the surface of the rock without damaging any of the art that's underneath. So that's a really simple, effective technique. However, it is extremely time-consuming and laborious, and it only works really in the case of charcoal. So some of the visitor impacts on rock art sites include people graffitiing with house paint or textures or, synthetic materials that are not easily removed from the surface at all. So, we have special responsibilities in that way to protect these places and try and avoid as much visitor impact to the sites as we can, and work with traditional owners to develop up these really easy techniques, both to conserve and restore the places to their, as close to their original state as possible, and also protect them for future generations. And then I think we're ready for the next slide. So in the same way as we have a rock art protection specialist in our team, we also have a burials protection specialist. Parks Victoria is responsible for vast Aboriginal cemeteries across the state. Obviously, with Aboriginal people living in Victoria for upwards of 60,000 years, their ancestors were buried respectfully with care in places that are usually within sand dunes. So again, the kind of areas where you would find shell middens, the similar kinds of areas where you would expect ancestral remains and ancient ancestral burials to be located. So coastlines, sand dunes, lunettes. And obviously, because these places are so fragile in terms of their ecosystems, and they're more prone to impacts of climate change, erosion, and obviously visitor impacts as well, changing water regimes. And one of the biggest threats is actually in the northwest, although this occurs across the whole state also, with invasive species like rabbits. I'm sure everyone's aware of rabbit warrens and how huge they can be and what a massive problem they are to the ecosystem in Victoria generally. Unfortunately, rabbits love the same kind of landforms that ancestral remains occur in. And it's a huge problem, especially in the northwest, where the cemetery areas or ancestral burial places extend basically from Mildura to the South Australian border and beyond. And we have a specific partnership project that we have focused on for the last couple of years with the traditional owners up there, the First Peoples of the Milwar Mallee Aboriginal Corporation, and the People and Parks Foundation, and then our team here within Parks Victoria, including the lovely men you can see on your screen right now. From the left, that's Carl, Jacko, Jason Bowden, also known as J-Bow, and then Brownie, Darren Brown on the right. And the map that they're holding up represents that area of Murray Sunset National Park from Mildura to the South Australian border, and basically everything along the river, their ancestral burial grounds, and that's where visitor impacts and rabbits are causing these huge problems where ancestral remains are being exposed. The previous slide showing that heavy machinery is actually part of the partnership project that we're working on with People and Parks Foundation and First Peoples of the Millewa Mallee, where we've developed up specific ways of restoring large burial places. Previously, they'd have to be recovered with the guys using just hand tools, shovels, wheelbarrows, and obviously across a huge landscape that's incredibly difficult and time consuming, and ancestral remains are being harmed whilst waiting to be recovered with the traditional owners and people up there. And this particular image was taken by drone at Lake Walla Walla. The area up to the tree line with the lake in the background is an example of one single lunette, and that contains many ancestral remains, but also all kinds of other cultural heritage as well. Artifacts are everywhere, hearths, everything. We use drones a lot in the northwest. This particular shot was just for imagery, but we do use drones to generate 3D models of dune areas, and we will do that before we do the work and then after we do the work, and then we can use the data that we get from that 3D model to actually measure how much sand has been moved in order to recover the ancestral remains. And then if we do flyovers in subsequent years after summer, winter, we can measure the amount of erosion that is ongoing at the site, and how we can also measure how successful the protection works have been in a particular area. I'm not sure what the next slide is. Katherine.
Thanks, Chrystle. We all lived through quite a significant fire season this last summer. Bushfire burnt approximately 1.5 million hectares within the state of Victoria, and with that causes quite large management issues or challenges. You can see to the image to the right, that's of Cape Conran. That dune system, and as Chrystle has explained just before, around sensitivities around dune systems can expose ancestral remains, but with fire it also provides an opportunity for us to have a look at what heritage is there underneath the vegetation. So it provides us with a great opportunity to get a greater understanding of our cultural landscapes. This bushfire season and our recovery program will provide us with great opportunity also to work closer with our traditional owner partners in recognitioned areas and non-recognised areas with all those who have an interest of that landscape. Bushfire Recovery Victoria is providing an opportunity for funding to support traditional owners to get out there in the country to map it, to start identifying and healing the cultural landscape. It's a great opportunity for us as Parks Victoria to work with those people on country and support them in getting back out onto country as well, and to heal the country, especially after such a horrendous fire season. And I think next on is Maria.
Thanks, Katherine. So Katherine and Chrystle have covered two of the key areas that support the Managing Country Together framework, and I'm going to bring us back to Aboriginal employment and wellbeing. So there are plans in place that address each of these key areas of action. They're either in place already or we're developing them along the way. One of the ones that is in place is the Aboriginal Employment and Wellbeing Plan, which sets a whole heap of objectives and goals that are quite ambitious, and we have been bold. We haven't been concerned about being bold. We've set bold targets and bold areas for action, because what we want to do is build towards a culturally competent organisation where our our Aboriginal colleagues are safe and supported and have opportunities to grow right across the organisation. The next slide will show you what we're sort of working with in terms of a conceptualisation of how cultural safety will be depicted across time. So, you know, at the left-hand side is the area you don't want to be in as an organisation, which is cultural destructiveness. And the sort of things you'd be imagining occurring there are a complete lack of respect, a complete lack of awareness, a complete lack of recognition, and even worse than that, perhaps a disregard for the obligations to protect and care for cultural landscapes, and to protect and care for opportunity for Aboriginal people within the organisation. So cultural proficiency is the place we want to be, and in that situation, all of us at Parks Victoria would be confident in our understanding of cultural ways of working together, and respect for traditional owner partners, respect for traditional owners within the organisation, respect for traditional owner cultures, and confidence that we are enacting that, we are operating in that environment on a day-to-day basis. This is absolutely critical for us, not just for our staff, but also for our traditional owner partners. There's you remember that I said earlier that these three areas are connected, and eventually where we'd like to be is that we will have our traditional owner partners working with us either within our organisation or within their own organisations as seems right for the work we're doing together. We're not quite there yet. There's still sort of those organisational issues to deal with, but that's where we're headed. And the Aboriginal Employment and Wellbeing Plan sets out how we intend to get there. I think at the moment there's about 4% of the Parks Victoria workforce that is Aboriginal, and our target is 7%. So within a couple of years, we want to increase the total number of our traditional of our Aboriginal staff from current levels to 7%. We have Aboriginal staff employed throughout the organisation across the land, across Victoria, but also at all sorts of different levels. We have district managers who are Aboriginal people. We have people who started as project firefighters who are Aboriginal people, and we have 2 Aboriginal people who are on the board. So it's very important for us that we have that participation at all levels of our organisational life. The picture you can see in front of us was taken up in the northwest at the Aboriginal Staff Conference. Parks Victoria has conducted an Aboriginal Staff Conference for around about 20 years now. So it's a program of activities that is conducted by Aboriginal staff and for Aboriginal staff. That's how it is now, but we've had a journey to get there. A couple of the attendees last year said to me that they'd gone to almost all of them, and at the beginning the conferences were mostly, their experience of the conference was that it was mostly non-Aboriginal people presenting to Aboriginal people, but they were really happy that the conferences had changed entirely and were now Aboriginal staff sharing knowledge with other Aboriginal staff, and you know that was a sign to them of the growth that Parks Victoria had made over that period of time. Unfortunately, COVID means we're not going to be able to all be together this year, but it's been a really important feature of the work that Parks Victoria has done with Aboriginal staff. And you'll see there's a couple of fellas in the left-hand side. One's wearing a, there's 2 guys with a hat. The one wearing the tan hat is Jeff Floyd, who's our Parks Victoria board member, And the man standing to his right is Simon Talbot, who's our Chief Operating Officer. And I think there's another board member that I saw just before, yes, John Pandazopoulos, who's a board member. So they also came as guests and attended part of the conference. So that, I hope, gives you a sense of how all parts of Parks Victoria are committed to achieving what we have set for ourselves as our targets in terms of Aboriginal employment and wellbeing. It's one illustration, but I think it's an important one, because I think what we're trying to say here is that managing country together requires all of us to work together. Requires us to work together to protect Aboriginal cultural heritage. We have upwards of 13,000 Aboriginal places registered on the land we manage. We have to look after those. It requires us to work in partnership with traditional owners to manage cultural heritage, to look after our parks so that we have got healthy cultural landscapes. The people have continuing access to practice culture, and it requires us to build a strong and capable Aboriginal workforce in park management so that we can integrate all that knowledge on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's really all we had ready for you to say, to talk from our point of view. And so we're in your hands to deal with whatever questions you might have.
Thanks, Maria. That was fantastic. We'll now spend a bit of time running through some of those questions that we've received. We've got some great comments and questions here. Probably just following on from your point, Maria, about it requiring us all to really work together. What are some of the things that volunteers and visitors can do to help us care for country and look after Aboriginal cultural heritage?
So that's a lovely question. So what I would encourage everyone to do is to learn a little and to ask some questions, follow some curious questions around. I'm glad to say there's loads of information on the internet now. You can find some of that on Aboriginal Victoria's website, some of it on our website. Chrystle, for example, mentioned the Aboriginal the ID booklet that we've prepared around Aboriginal cultural heritage. So these are tools that you can use to deepen your knowledge of traditional owners in Victoria and of Aboriginal cultural heritage in Victoria. So I'd absolutely encourage people to do that. If you are in an area with formal recognition, find out a little bit about your traditional owner corporation, find out if there's anything that is available through that traditional owner corporation. Many of them run cultural awareness training. Many of them have projects that may need volunteer support. So there's a whole heap of different opportunities available, and the benefits that come from that are that sort of richer appreciation of the place you're in, what Victoria's sort of deep history is all about.
Awesome. And do we partner with other organisations, and are there other opportunities to partner with organisations? A few of our audience members have suggested Museums Victoria, Trust for Nature and tourism operators. Do we have some strong partnerships with those groups existing?
We do have strong partnerships with those sorts of organisations. Particularly Trust for Nature is a strong partner for us, and we work really in a very interconnected way with tourism operators, both licensed tour operators that work on the Parks estate, but also through sort of peak bodies like Tourism Victoria, Sport and Recreation Victoria. There's a range of different ways we seek to integrate into tourism activities. We have a partnership also with an organisation called the People and Parks Foundation, and they through them we've built partnerships with a couple of philanthropic bodies that are supporting the work we're doing in the Northwest. So yeah, those partnerships with non-Aboriginal organisations are a key component of supporting the work we're doing through Managing Country Together.
And how do we work with other government organisations? Do we share systems and information across government organisations? And are we at a best practice level when we think about the work that other organisations do?
I guess there's always more we can do, and I think that we are keen to achieve world's best practice. That's what we've committed ourselves to in the Managing Country Together framework. I'm pretty confident that the Managing Country Together framework is setting us in the right direction. I know this because we've aligned it with world best practice through our connections with international conservation movements, and also here in Victoria, as I said before, where we're strongly aligned with the self-determination reform agenda. We're strongly aligned with the Victorian government's general focus around traditional owner partnerships and the recognition of those partnerships and strengthening of them. Of course, there's more we can do, and that comment about sharing information and sharing ideas and sharing practices is a really valuable one, because the more we can do together, the more we can learn from one another, the better our progress will be. So I'm sure there's plenty more we could do.
We've got a great question here about how we support traditional owners to share their stories on country. Could you tell us a little bit about the interpretation that we provide across our parks estate, and how we support these groups to tell these incredible stories?
So there's one of the great things about the 21st century is there's plenty of opportunities to share stories that are agile and nimble, and we can create them and share them with a vast audience, as we're kind of doing right now. Not that I'm a traditional owner sharing a story, but you know, this technology we're using right now is going right across Victoria, and we're able to share these ideas and experiences pretty quickly. We try to use those as best we can. We've got some video footage of traditional owners that are employed within Parks Victoria, talking about working on country, talking about stories. We provide opportunities for traditional owners working within Parks Victoria to do that. Of course, traditional owners themselves are the owners of their stories and the owners of their knowledge, and anything we do needs to be done in partnership with them. We work closely with them to understand what they want to share and with whom they want to share those stories. So I suppose one of the things I'd reflect on in my own experience over my lifetime is that there was a time when there wasn't a strong interest in those stories, and I'm really glad I now live in a time when there is a real thirst for those stories. But we need to do that in partnership, and sometimes that means we need to be patient because traditional owners might need some time to talk as a community about what stories they want to share and how they want to go about sharing them. So that's a bit about what the Deep Partnership's about. In the meantime, if there are people out there who are interested in furthering their understanding, the work that Bunjalaka does at Melbourne Museum is fantastic, and the work that the Koori Heritage Trust does is also fantastic. So these are places where you can deepen your own knowledge, and you can be confident that that knowledge has been prepared in partnership with the traditional owners who are sharing it with you.
There's a comment here about, why aren't there more guidelines provided at the entrance to our parks talking about Aboriginal burials? Perhaps that's one for you, Chrystle. Is there? It's obviously a very sensitive and difficult conversation. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, exactly that. It's a sensitive and difficult conversation. And obviously, traditional owners and even us as park managers don't want ancestral burials to be harmed or disturbed in any way. And it's an unfortunate byproduct of public knowledge. Like, so if the public knows where these places are, then that increases the likelihood of harm to those places. And again, like Maria said, it's really up to traditional owners if they want the general public to be made aware of burial places and but you find that often signage draws attention to these places. And historically speaking, these ancestral burial places have essentially been plundered by grave robbers. So up until even the 80s, people were under the guise of sort of research and in the name of science, were actually stealing the ancestral remains of Aboriginal people, which is quite obviously a sensitive subject for everybody. Nobody wants their ancestors' remains to be taken and put in a museum or used for any purpose. The ancestral remains belong in the ground where they were originally buried. So there are many thousands of ancestral remains from even within Victoria that have been taken across the world and are now sitting in museums and universities. So with that knowledge that there's already been a huge impact on these places and traditional owners are carrying that impact, we need to be extremely sensitive and careful about how we manage these places and what knowledge about these places is publicly available, because there are still people, obviously few and far between, but there are still people that have an interest in stealing ancestral remains. I think that answers it best. Do you think anyone else have anything to add to that?
Yeah.
But again, if you're in conversation with traditional owners, ask them. Ask them how they feel about this kind of thing.
In the most recent bushfires, this might be one for you, Katherine, what sort of impact was there? Was it really quite severe, and did we discover any new sites or artefacts? Were there any positives?
Yeah, so for me, watching the fire and watching the fire landscape as it built and built by every day, my first thought when, as a traditional owner in that landscape, was all those scar trees that we've just lost through that whole landscape that we will never get back, and that may not even be mapped because they're in real remote country, especially in that high country along those waterways. That was my biggest heartbreak personally, watching that fire come through. The positive that we've got out of it is there is greater funding opportunities to support traditional owners to get back out onto country, to map country and to identify those scatter sites, ceremonial sites, and to get sort of support the old people to show the young ones onto country as well through that funding opportunity. So that's a real positive. But still at the moment, given with COVID and all the other situations that are around us and how limited we're able to get back into that country and how much that vegetation is coming back really quickly, we've got a real small opportunity there before, and still sort of reeling with that heartbreak of that destruction to that country.
Yeah.
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah.
Thanks, sweetie.
We've got a question here about the EPBC, the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. How does that apply when we're managing Aboriginal cultural heritage?
Okay, I'm going to take this question because I don't think anybody else is. The EPBC Act does apply on the land we manage. It's not an area that we specialise in managing country together. So our planning and policy area of parks ensures that we comply with the EPBC Act. There's been a review of that Act that you may have read about in the news over the last couple of weeks. Graham Samuels conducted a review, and his view was that the protection it gave to Aboriginal cultural heritage was largely inadequate. It was a bit too late in the process usually, and it didn't give appropriate recognition to traditional owner knowledge. He called it Indigenous knowledge because he was talking about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, so he used the term Indigenous. In Victoria, we're only talking about Aboriginal people, and when we're talking about country, we're talking about traditional owners. So I'm saying traditional owners, but I think we're talking about the same thing. So he's called on reform to elevate the importance of traditional knowledge and to improve the recognition and protection of Aboriginal cultural heritage across Australia by creating national standards that will ensure the, better protection. So I think his assessment is that there's more to be done there, but I certainly wouldn't suggest I have special expertise in the EPBC Act.
Does Parks Victoria work closely with schools and universities and junior rangers? Are we educating, we're kind of influencing the education system wherever we can?
Yeah, I'll take that question. Yeah, so Parks works with community rangers. We've got employed community rangers, and they work through our junior ranger program. And sometimes when we're working in a joint management park where it's very clear the traditional owners, we've got that agreement with the traditional owners that that's their landscape and that's their country. We work with them and we talk about the cultural landscape and connect back to the school groups and to the junior ranger program. About that country, and usually it's led by the traditional owners, so they'll send a ranger out, joint management ranger out, to actually speak to those school groups.
Awesome. How far off do you think we are from incorporating cultural burning into mainstream land management practice in Victoria?
You do it, Katherine.
Yep, I'll take it again.
Yep, that'd be great. I can add some stuff, but that'd be great.
So in some areas we're already doing that. So it's all integrated into the joint management plans. So the Jar Jar Rung ranges, which were a picture of those ranges during that cultural ranger presentation. They're currently operating, and they've been doing it for a number of years now, and working together with DELP and Parks Victoria for burning practices on landscape. In the instance of Gunai-Kurnai people, they are still building to build a program. So they're starting to talk with DELP and to capture that intangible knowledge from the elders and implement that into a plan, strategic plan for burning on the country. They do have a ranger program where the rangers are actually part of fire suppression. So last fire season, they were critical and completely active from September at the start of the season right through to be out there on country to help with the suppression efforts. They also helped with identifying cultural heritage within the fire footprint to try and minimise any of the fire suppression activity harming cultural heritage in the landscape. So, and that was a real pivotal part and real pivotal moment for the Gunai-Kurnai people to be able to be put into place to support strategic direction around fire suppression that avoided harm. A similar example for Budjabim as well, where they were involved, the Gunditjmara people were involved in strategically directing suppression to avoid harm to Budjabim, particularly given that it's quite a sensitive location with the eel traps and the stone huts to try and avoid any harm there. I think Maria's going to add to that.
Yep. the only thing I wanted to add, which hopefully you can hear me saying, is that the Victorian government has adopted a statewide cultural burning strategy, and that sets out some directions in terms of how cultural burning practices can be facilitated through the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning and through Parks Victoria. So there's work happening right now that should result in better integration of traditional knowledge and Western knowledge in a way that helps us towards those healthy cultural landscapes that we've set as our vision, working in partnership with traditional owners. Yeah.
Excellent. How do we reconcile contemporary land uses like mining and other contemporary issues that we have? Do we have I mean, every case is quite unique, I imagine, and needs quite a context-specific solution. But how do we work through that, reconciling contemporary use and traditional use?
Katherine?
Yeah. I think Katherine will have a few things to say about this, so maybe let's start with her. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Maria. For me, it's about engagement with traditional owners, and it's traditional owner led. So it's up to traditional owners about sort of setting what they want on country and how they want their country managed. So anything such as the mine, the mining company is obligated to meet certain statutory or requirements underneath the Native Title Act. Whether the mine goes ahead is really about engagement and negotiation with the traditional owners of that country. I think Maria also wants to add a bit more.
Yeah, I think Katherine's right that where we're starting has to be with traditional owner partners, and that's certainly the way Parks Victoria sees it. We have a range of different legislative responsibilities that we need to work within in order to protect and manage the public land for the benefit of all Victorians. And for us, that means the way we do that is working with traditional owners to deliver healthy cultural landscapes. Now, there's always I think usual business for land managers is a lot of different people with a lot of different interests wanting to do what they want to do in the same place at the same time. So there's always competition about different activities within one landscape. And that brings us into the negotiation that Katherine described. But we know that by working in effective and robust relationships with traditional owners, we have the best chance of building the kind of healthy cultural landscapes that we've set ourselves to delivering for the benefit of all Victorians. So I know that's a sort of very broad answer, but I think it's important to remember where you're trying to head when you're doing those case-by-case, project-by-project works, the planning around those works, the talking about those works, and the negotiations around those works. Yep, that's all I wanted to say.
Excellent. Yeah, look, I think, we certainly work quite closely with you guys as well from a non-Aboriginal heritage perspective. And of course, we've got our natural heritage, our amazing natural heritage across our parks estate as well. So I think we work really hard to think about cultural heritage in a really holistic sense, making sure that we're honouring all of those layers of history in our incredible estate. How do we reconcile natural heritage and Aboriginal cultural heritage? Often they're very, very closely intertwined. How do we manage that together?
Katherine, you're starting. Katherine, you're
on mute. You're on mute, Katherine.
Oh, thank you. I just said apologies because I was sort of saying that I thought Chrystle was going to answer that question. That's okay. So how do we bring those two together? I think the simple answer is that that's all one country.
Yeah.
Like there is no separation. There is no separation in cultural law. There is no separation in cultural practices within that landscape. So we see it as one.
Mm. Yeah.
Chrystle, you can add on.
Oh, I don't think there's anything more to add to that. But I mean, in working with traditional owners always say that, and they always say that everything exists because of the ancestors. You know, country has been cared for forever, and the current environment and landscape exists because of the ancestors, and the artifacts are what's left behind that show you that the ancestors were there. It's completely interconnected.
Yeah. We've got quite a specific question here. What future role will Aboriginal rangers have in managing Hepburn Regional Park and Mount Franklin?
I've put my hand up to answer the question, although I don't know what the answer is in specifics. What I can say is that that park is within Dja Dja Wurrung country, and so we're about to finalise a partnership agreement with Dja Dja Wurrung. We're already in joint management with them, but we are building a holistic agreement that is going to guide our overall relationship with Dja Dja Wurrung, including the joint managed parks, but beyond that as well. So I think that we will work that through in further discussions with the traditional owners. The other side of that is that the Dja Dja Wurrung traditional owners, Dja Dja Wurrung Clans Traditional Owner Aboriginal Corporation is currently renegotiating its recognition and settlement agreement arrangements with the Victorian government, and the outcome of those negotiations with the Victorian government will have an impact and in terms of what opportunities will come into the future. I hope that's as much of an answer as I can provide.
Great. Yeah, look, I think that really flows very well onto this next question. How will joint management change the way that parks are managed and used into the future?
Yep, so I'll answer that one. How it will change in the future? Well, for me as a Gunai Kurnai person and speaking as a traditional owner, it's really going to be about meeting our aspirations for caring for country and looking after country and making sure that we're doing that the right way and that everyone can see that. So the general public, everyone else out there gets to see and enjoy the park and sort of work towards building it back up, cleaning it up, making sure that it looks and looks clean and healthy. And we just want to make sure that everyone can enjoy a good, healthy country, because with a healthy country, we have healthy people.
Awesome, thank you. I think that brings us to the end of our questions now. I just wanted to thank all three of you, Maria, Katherine and Chrystle, for your presentation and responses to those questions. And thank you all at home for being here with us today and contributing some of those great comments and questions. We all acknowledge that this is quite a difficult time for everyone, and we continue to look for opportunities to engage volunteers during this time. And as restrictions ease, we're very grateful for the significant amount of time that volunteers give to Parks Victoria. If you have any suggestions or ideas on how you'd like to be involved moving forward, please don't hesitate to get in touch by emailing our volunteering team at volunteer@parks.vic.gov.au. It's been great for our team to receive all of your feedback on the previous webinars over the past 3 months. And as a result, we're pleased to announce that we'll be continuing this Insights into Nature webinar series with a special focus on Melbourne from next fortnight. So the next few webinars will focus on a number of different threatened species which call Melbourne home, and some of the special gardens that are located across the Melbourne region. So next fortnight, we continue with a webinar focused specifically on the eastern barred bandicoots at Woodlands Historic Park, located behind Melbourne Airport, and the Flying Foxes that are located at Yarra Bend Park. So keep an eye on your emails for further information on how to register for those next webinars. That brings our session to a close today. So thank you all for being part of it, and thanks again to our speakers, and take care everyone. Bye.